Hey guys, Will Wood here. I wanted to do a brief video on the differences between the Appalachian Trail and the Pacific Crest Trail, two of the most popular long distance trails here in the US. So I wanted to go over some differences for those of you that might be trying to decide which trail you'd like to do or planning for either one of the trails. As far as the trail itself is concerned, the Pacific Crest Trail is much less steep, so the grade is better. It is also a horse trail, so you can ride on horseback the entire way. So there's not situations like on the Appalachian Trail where you might have to scramble over big rocks and boulders, climb ladders, stuff like that, especially up in the White Mountains and in Maine. There's none of that on the Pacific Crest Trail. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not rocks or roots. There are some rocks through different sections along the Pacific Crest Trail. But on the Appalachian Trail, it's just much more commonplace. Another difference, or primary difference with the Pacific Crest Trail is that there's a lot more switchbacks. So you can oftentimes see the trail for miles in front of you. That's not ever really something you experience on the Appalachian Trail, considering that you are oftentimes in deep foliage and you're not really able to see what's going to be coming around the bend. On the Pacific Crest Trail, you're often exposed, and so your draw distance is much longer, so you can see people way ahead of you or way down below you. So that's pretty cool, honestly. I kind of liked being able to see where I was going. I will say that as far as for me with a fair skin, the constant exposure did make it a little bit more difficult. So I would recommend carrying an umbrella or something like that if you don't want to be exposed to the sun the entire time you're hiking, because until you really get to Northern California, maybe starting in Central California and then on up, you are going to be exposed. There's not going to be much forest at all. Now let's go to water discussions. That's a pretty big question I'm oftentimes receiving. What's the water situation like on the Pacific Crest Trail? For those of you that have seen my AT videos, you already know the water is abundant on the AT. It's really not something that you have to worry about very often. But the Pacific Crest Trail, it's a whole nother story. Oftentimes you're hiking anywhere, I would say a normal distance in between water sources might be 8 to 12 miles, but there are oftentimes 20-mile stretches, 30-mile stretches, and I think there's even a few 40-mile stretches. And you really, sometimes you don't know, you have to keep up with a water report that the Pacific Crest Trail puts up on their website that will help you to know whether or not there's going to be even water at a source that you're told there might be. So you have to check that, because the water on the Pacific Crest Trail, a source might be flowing one week and then the very next week it might be completely dry, and then you're stuck having to hike however much further to the next water source. So it's extremely important to be on top of that. Water sources on the Pacific Crest Trail do become kind of like the shelters on the AT. People kind of huddle around the water sources, camp around the water sources. So those really are, if you're hiking alone and you want to find people, that's kind of the place where that happens. Another thing with the water sources on the Pacific Crest Trail, they are oftentimes low flowing or no flow. So small pools of water or very low flowing water sources. I don't think I even came to my first flowing water source until maybe a few 300 miles in or so, when we got to our first real river slash stream. Oftentimes they are troughs for cows, cattle, horse, with little pipes going down into it. Pretty nasty water. So you want to make sure on this trail you have to filter your water. There's really no way around it. I didn't filter my water on the Appalachian Trail. That is not something that you can pull off on the Pacific Crest Trail. There are certain sections where you'll be able to go without filtering, in the high Sierras when you're drinking from springs, but that's not very commonplace on this trail. You're getting a lot of water from these troughs, and then also from water caches. Water caches are very, very common and a popular way to get water, and if there were no water caches on this trail, it'd be very difficult to pull it off. One of the main reasons you have to have a filter on the Pacific Crest Trail is due to the sheer amount of cows that are found on this trail. So unfortunately, a lot of the water sources have been stampeded by cows. There are cow patties everywhere, so it's not any type of water source that you would want to risk drinking without some type of filter. I would definitely recommend, if you're going to be doing the Pacific Crest Trail, a filter like a Sawyer Squeeze or a traditional pump style filter. Those would be the two that I would use if I was going to do the Pacific Crest Trail again. So now let's go ahead and get into kind of the weather and the temperature that you're going to be experiencing while on the Pacific Crest Trail compared to the AT. Obviously the AT, you're going to be under foliage and forest the majority of the time, 95%, 98% of the time. So you don't really have to worry about the sun beating down on you, and the temperature on the AT is hot and muggy, much more humid, but like I said, you're in the shade, so it's much more manageable. On the Pacific Crest Trail, you're exposed the majority of the time until you get to the northern sections, and then some sections in central and northern California. However, you'll be in trees and then you'll come around the bend. This is on the Pacific Crest Trail, and all of a sudden you'll be right back out exposed again. So the temperatures are pretty comparable, but the Pacific Crest Trail much more dry, much more arid, no humidity to deal with. Also, as far as the weather is concerned, we had only a couple days of rain on the entire Pacific Crest Trail. We did about 1,800 miles of that. Now, the further north you get into Washington, that does change. On the AT, you can experience any weather at pretty much any time. I had snow on the AT. I had snow on the Pacific Crest Trail though as well, and I started late April. So you will experience most likely some cold nights on the Pacific Crest Trail and the AT if you start early. Storms on the Pacific Crest Trail can be very, very vicious, and they can come out of nowhere. It gets so hot there in the desert, and then sometimes in the evening it's just an explosion of a thunderstorm. And when you're high up, because you are at higher elevations on the Pacific Crest Trail, you reach the highest point that you ever attain on the AT within the first 100 or so miles on the Pacific Crest Trail, and you get as high as 13,200 feet, 14,500 feet if you decide to climb Mount Whitney, which most everyone does attempt. So the storms are just more dangerous on the Pacific Crest Trail. Bad hail, bad lightning, and nothing to protect you from the storms. On the AT, you're under the trees, which also present dangers when it comes to falling branches or falling trees. So kind of one of the misconceptions about the Pacific Crest Trail is that it's really only tough to find water in the desert section, which is usually around the first 700 miles of the trail up into Kennedy Meadows. This is not accurate. In Northern California, there's many stretches without water, and the desert-like conditions can be found pretty much along the whole trail, probably excluding Washington. There are a lot of burnt sections on the Pacific Crest Trail, so any of the burnt sections pretty much then turn into almost a desert-like trail condition. So lack of water, very dry, very arid, and very hot. On the AT, I didn't come across one burnt section, so this was not any type of an issue. But like I said, with the Pacific Crest Trail, you will experience kind of desert-like conditions the majority of your hiking. The southern section, of course, though, is kind of more the true desert, especially around the town of Mojave. When you do cross a little piece of the Mojave Desert, it's not too bad. Most of the sections like that, people attempt at night. Let's go into kind of the trail culture, comparing the two. The AT obviously is the grandfather of all long-distance hiking trails. The trail culture that's found on that trail is not even comparable to the PCT in any way. The fact that everyone kind of goes by a trail name on the PCT, on the Appalachian Trail, that is true on the Pacific Crest Trail as well, but it's not, on the AT, if you come across someone that doesn't have a trail name, it's extremely rare. On the Pacific Crest Trail, there are a lot of people that just don't go by a trail name, so it's not the same kind of experience. You do meet people from all over the world on both, but the Appalachian Trail, there are probably 2 times as many people on that trail, maybe 3, so you're meeting people from all over the world. The trail culture, the people that you meet on the Appalachian Trail, to me, I met more people on that trail and kind of had more of a social scene compared to the Pacific Crest Trail. Granted, there is a huge social scene on the Pacific Crest Trail too. I'm not saying that that doesn't exist. It's just if you get separated from the bubble on that trail, you can go days without seeing anyone, which is not something you ever have to experience on the Appalachian Trail. The Pacific Crest Trail is much more secluded. When you're out on the trail, you're not really going to see day hikers at all, unless if you are in popular sections in Central California, around national parks, things like that. I think for the first 500 miles or until we got to the Los Angeles area, we really didn't see any day hikers. Not very common. On the AT, you're going to see day hikers almost daily, especially on the weekends. You're going to see a lot of day hikers. So something to consider if you want a more secluded hike, Pacific Crest Trail. If you want to be around other people more often, Appalachian Trail. Both trails have unbelievable trail towns. Now, the Pacific Crest Trail kind of takes it to the next level. There are a lot more trail towns. They are further off trail, so it does require longer hitches. 20-30 mile hitches are commonplace on the Pacific Crest Trail. That's something that you very rarely do on the Appalachian Trail until you get to Maine, New Hampshire, further north. But the towns on the Pacific Crest Trail are really cool. You have Lake Tahoe, you can hit Los Angeles if you want to, you can hit Portland. Those are a little bit further off, but there's a lot of cool towns, Mammoth, with a lot of stuff going on in those towns. The hotels on the AT are much cheaper. You're going to find that you're paying much higher prices for hotels on the Pacific Crest Trail. Food is more expensive on the Pacific Crest Trail. Restaurants are more expensive on the Pacific Crest Trail, so you're going to spend a lot more money on the Pacific Crest Trail than you would on the AT. But if you stay out of the towns in general and you do drop boxes, then you're not going to really see much of a difference. As far as time to do both trails, you're going to be hiking both trails in about the same amount of time. Even though the Pacific Crest Trail is about 500 miles longer than the Appalachian Trail, you need to complete it in the same amount of time due to extreme weather that can occur up in Washington in the mountains, North Cascade National Park. Those are some of the most aggressive mountains. Unfortunately, I didn't get to do it this year. I'm going to be probably returning here the next year or so to finish the last 800 miles of the trail that I have. But like I said, both trails are going to require about 6 to 8 months. Now granted, you can do it much faster if you want to just fly through it and you don't want to really spend any time in the town, taking many 0 days off. You can finish in 4 to 5 months. I know many people that do them that quick. Okay, so now for a couple just questions, broad questions. Which did I think was harder? Personally, this was a question I was wrestling with a lot of the time on the Pacific Crest Trail. Just kind of comparing the two. At first I thought, man, the AT is definitely harder. Physically it is harder. It's harder on your body. The trail is much less graded. It's rough. There's rocks, there's roots. Even though that exists on the PCT, it is commonplace and constant on the Appalachian Trail. You're climbing a lot more mountains on a daily basis on the AT, and oftentimes with very little to no switchbacks. It's just much tougher hiking when compared to the Pacific Crest Trail. But when you consider other things about the Pacific Crest Trail, like the lack of water, that's a big thing to a lot of people. I hike pretty fast, so for me I was still able to go pretty low, carrying about 1 to 2 liters, 3 liters, sometimes 4 liters at the max. A lot of people though were requiring 5 to 7 liters. I don't know if that was just due to they wanted to make sure they had water or they hiked a little bit slower pace. The temperatures, no bailout points. I mean, you're constantly going about 100 miles in between roads. On the AT, you can always get off trail if you need to until you get to certain sections that are more secluded up in Maine and New Hampshire, especially Maine. So lack of bailout points, lack of people on the Pacific Crest Trail, lack of water. The heat for me was a big player. I had much tougher times hiking in the desert and when it was, in the mid-90s with no trees. I mean, you'll hike without seeing trees some days, and that's pretty miserable. My umbrella, like I said, was a huge lifesaver for me. So when you throw all those things in consideration, for me, this can vary obviously from person to person, but for me the Pacific Crest Trail was harder. I didn't have issues with my knees or with my body on the AT, so that really didn't come into play for me, and it was a much easier trail in the sense that you can essentially jump on the AT without doing any planning, and you can hike and finish that trail. You can do that on the PCT too. I didn't do any drop boxes really, except for some sections that require it. So you can jump on the PCT too, especially if you have the experience, but it's much more difficult. You have to be aware of your surroundings. You have to be aware of your water situation. With the AT, that's not required. So for me, I found the Pacific Crest Trail to be harder. Now, which would I recommend if you only could hike one trail? That again is another tough question. The AT is a beautiful trail. If you like the forest, then you're gonna wanna hike the Appalachian Trail because you're not really getting that type of environment on the Pacific Crest Trail. It's open, you have grand views at all times. You're constantly able to see the mountain ranges. In the AT, you're oftentimes in the forest with very little views, unless if you start early in the wintertime when the leaves are not yet on the tree. If you like I said, that kind of environment of the forest, the social aspect of it, hiking probably arguably the most famous trail in the world, I couldn't recommend another trail more. The Appalachian Trail is the one. There's a lot more going on than just the beauty. The Pacific Crest Trail, if you want the secludedness to just kind of be in nature, you're not going to see as much wildlife on that trail. I saw much more wildlife on the AT. I saw over 30 something bears. On the PCT I saw about 6 or 7 bears. Did see a lot of coyotes on the Pacific Crest Trail, a lot of rattlesnakes, a lot of bees, and hornets on the trail, and ants on the Pacific Crest Trail. On the AT, you're just seeing bears, deer, snakes, black snakes. Honestly, it's a personal preference. I probably would recommend the AT, but I could be biased as well. I'm from the East Coast, and that trail has always been near and dear to my heart. You're going to see stuff you've never seen on the Pacific Crest Trail when it comes to just beauty. The High Sierras, the John Muir Trail section, I can't recommend that section enough. It's the best section I've ever done of hiking or backpacking in my entire life. Look it up if you don't know much about it. I do have some videos on the John Muir Trail as well. I would recommend the AT, but for grandeur, for just overall beauty, for seclusion, for all of those aspects, I would definitely recommend the Pacific Crest Trail. Really hope that this has been beneficial, that I've answered a lot of your questions. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I might not have covered that I really wanted to touch on, and I don't think there is. So if you have any other questions, something that I might have missed on, please hit me up with a comment below, and I will try to reach back to you as best I can. Otherwise, guys, happy hiking.